You are standing in a room, and someone is pushing, pressing, provoking, demanding a reaction, any reaction, a word, a flinch, a crack in your composure, and you feel it rising, the heat in your chest, the tightness in your jaw, the words forming on your tongue like weapons waiting to be fired, and every fiber of your being wants to respond, to defend, to explain, to fight back, because that is what you have been trained to do. That is what your instincts demand. That is what every cell in your body is screaming at you to do, and yet somewhere deep inside, a quieter voice, a voice that sounds suspiciously like wisdom, whispers a single word: stop. Seneca knew this because he had seen it, lived it, survived it. He had watched emperors destroy their rivals not by attacking them directly, but by provoking them into foolish reactions, by pressing their buttons until they exploded in ways that made them look weak, unstable, unworthy of power. He had seen brilliant men fall because they could not control their tongues, could not master their tempers, could not resist the bait that was dangled in front of them. And he had written about it, in his treatise on anger, in his letters to Lucilius, in the quiet wisdom of a man who had learned that the greatest victory is the victory over yourself. This is the moment that separates the man who is free from the man who is controlled, the man who owns his reactions from the man who is owned by them, the man who understands the ancient truth that Seneca discovered 2,000 years ago in the halls of the Roman Empire, where power was exercised not through force but through manipulation, where the most effective weapon was not the sword but the provocation, where the strongest men were not those who could strike the hardest but those who could not be made to strike at all. In the first book of On Anger, Seneca made a statement that cuts through the centuries like a blade, observing that anger can venture upon nothing by itself without the approval of the mind, that it is not the provocation that causes the reaction but the mind's decision to react. He understood that the external event is not the cause of your anger, it is merely the occasion for it, and that the real source of your rage is not what the other person did, but what you chose to feel about what they did. This is the fundamental insight that most people never grasp, the insight that the manipulator depends on you not knowing, the insight that once you understand, you become untouchable. The manipulator needs your reaction. That is the secret. That is the engine of their power. They cannot control you without your participation. They cannot hurt you without your consent. They cannot make you feel anything unless you agree to feel it. And the moment you understand this, the moment you realize that your emotions are not things that happen to you, but things that you choose, you have already begun to break their grip. But perhaps, you might argue, anger should be embraced as a tool, since it is often useful. It raises the spirit and excites it. Without anger, the bravest man would not perform heroic deeds on the battlefield. This flame is necessary to fuel courage and send the brave into the thick of danger. This is why some believe that the best approach is to channel anger within limits, not to destroy it entirely. We need to rid ourselves of excess anger that overflows beyond measure, leaving a moderate amount, just enough for beneficial effect, so that our active resolve does not weaken, our strength does not fade, and our vital energy does not wither. Perhaps it could be done, but Seneca believed it should not be done. He described anger as a kind of madness that makes us forget ourselves, a brief insanity that robs us of our reason, our dignity, our freedom. He warned that the man who gives in to anger is not a free man, but a slave, a prisoner of his own emotions, a puppet whose strings are pulled by whoever can push his buttons. And he offered a solution, a practice, a discipline that would make you immune to the manipulations of others, the discipline of silence. This is what Seneca taught, that silence is not weakness but strength, that the refusal to respond is not submission but victory. He wrote that if you want to conquer anger, the first step is to hide it, to give it no outlet, to refuse it the expression that gives it life. He understood that anger feeds on expression, that every word spoken in rage makes the next word easier, that every outburst strengthens the habit of outburst, and that the only way to break the cycle is to stop it at the source, to refuse to give it voice, to let the silence swallow it whole. Think about the physiology of control, the way that manipulation works on a physical level, the way that the provocateur is trying to trigger a response in your nervous system, to raise your heart rate, to quicken your breathing, to flood your body with adrenaline and cortisol, to put you in a state where you are no longer thinking clearly, where you are reacting instead of responding, where you are doing exactly what they want you to do. This is not philosophy, this is biology, This is the ancient fight-or-flight response that has kept humans alive for millennia, but that is now being used against you by people who understand its power. The manipulator is not trying to win an argument. They are trying to win a reaction, because the reaction is the proof of their control, the evidence that they can still move you, the confirmation that you are not as strong as you pretend to be. And this is where silence becomes your superpower, the one tool that the manipulator cannot counter, the one response that leaves them with nothing to work with. When you remain silent, you break the circuit. You refuse to complete the loop. You become a black hole for their energy, absorbing their provocation without giving anything back, leaving them with nothing but the echo of their own words, the hollow sound of their own aggression, the uncomfortable realization that they have no power over you. Silence is not passive. It is deeply active. It is the most aggressive thing you can do to a manipulator because it deprives them of the one thing they need to survive: your participation. So what does this look like in practice? How do you actually use silence as a weapon against those who try to control you? There is a tool, a simple but powerful technique that you can use in any situation where you feel the pressure rising, the anger building, the urge to respond overwhelming you. When you feel the provocation coming, when you sense that someone is trying to push your buttons, you pause. You take a breath. You count to 5 in your head. And then, with complete calm, with no emotion in your voice, no edge in your tone, no tension in your body, you ask a single question. What do you mean by that? This is not a question asked in anger. It is not a challenge. It is not a defense. It is a request for clarification, a way of buying time, a way of forcing the other person to explain themselves, to articulate their provocation, to show their hand. And most of the time, they cannot. Most of the time, they are not prepared to explain what they mean because what they mean is nothing, because they are not trying to communicate, they are trying to provoke, and the question exposes that, reveals it, takes away its power. The question puts the burden back on them, forces them to own their words, makes them responsible for their aggression. This is the practice that Seneca would recommend, the discipline that he lived by, the approach that allowed him to survive in the most dangerous court in the world, surrounded by enemies who would have loved to see him lose his composure, to make a mistake, to give them the excuse they needed to destroy him. He survived because he could not be provoked. He survived because he had mastered the art of silence. He survived because he placed his trust not in anger, but in reason. And if I tell you, writes Seneca, that reason itself is much stronger than anger, even in those matters for which anger alone is considered useful. For reason, once it has decided that something must be done, remains firm in its resolution. It never finds anything better than itself to which it would want to change, and therefore remains faithful to the decision once made. But anger often retreats, for example, before mercy. It has no real strength. It is inflated with empty pride, and is impressive only in appearance. And it is destructive only at the beginning, like winds that rise from the earth and take their start in rivers and swamps. They are gusty but quickly subside. So too with anger. It begins with a surge of enormous force, and then it weakens and fades before its time. The very anger that burns so fiercely with bloodthirstiness, inventing unheard of forms of torture, by the time the execution is to take place, has already subsided and softened. Feeling subsides quickly, reason remains always the same. And here is the deeper truth, the truth that Seneca understood and that most people never learn, the truth that the person trying to provoke you is not your enemy. They are your mirror, showing you exactly where you still have work to do, exactly where you are still vulnerable, exactly where you still need to grow. The provocateur is a gift, an unwanted gift perhaps, but a gift nonetheless, because they are revealing your weaknesses to you, showing you the buttons that still need to be disarmed, the triggers that still need to be defused, the reactions that still need to be mastered. And when you can thank them for that, when you can see their provocation not as an attack, but as an opportunity, you have achieved a level of freedom that most people never reach. So the next time someone tries to push your buttons, pause, breathe, count to 5, and ask yourself, is this worth my peace? Is this worth my freedom? Is this worth the dignity of a man who has chosen to master himself rather than be mastered by others? And if the answer is no, let the silence speak for you.